Okay, so a lot of you are saying D. Now I want to show you something real quick. Can evolution or natural selection work on a single individual? Can it just happen in one person?
No.
Do you need a population? You need a group, right? You need a population. So let's go back to the question now. So what is the answer? It's a single fly, fossilized turtle cannot reproduce. Cell in your body whose DNA develops mutation as a result of exposures to X-rays. And this is most likely a bad mutation too. This exposure to X-ray, but it's a single cell in a single person's body. So the answer is this, A. This is the only one that has a group or a population. So keep that in mind. Okay, make a note that you need a population. You cannot work on an individual person because there's a very low chance the gene's going to be passed on in a whole population. You need a higher number of individuals passing on the genes. So let's go ahead and talk about Darwin now. So here, this is when the idea started to kind of develop. So Greeks, Aristotle, he said that individuals and species are basically identical and species are unchanging. So Greeks, they also said that if you mix the paint, red and white paint, you get purple paint. That's true for codominance, but it's not true overall. So they were wrong about that. This idea here that individuals and species are basically identical and species are unchanging, this is coming from religion. It's saying that God had created everything, and then everyone is perfect as they are. So this is coming from a religion belief, and that no, the species are unchanging. There's nothing that's being changed. They're perfect as they are. When Buffon came, he says species change as they spread from their original location. And then after a few years, there was Lamarck. He said new species come from existing species through environmental forces. So for example, giraffes, they stretched their necks as the trees got taller because they wanted to, survive. Lyell said that all changes in nature are gradual, means they happen gradually over time. You can't just, measure a change in a year or two. You have to wait for generations in order to see the change. Then Darwin was the, one who said individuals in populations are different and species arise through process of natural selection. And Wallace was the one who encouraged him to publish. We also talked about Mendelian genetics, and that happened around, I think, 1865, so around the same time, but they didn't really know each other. They didn't know each other, but it happened around the same time. So they were kind of working on the similar ideas during the same time. So Darwin was the one who, came up with the theory of evolution. He was the one who was able to figure this out. Now, because I said this was an idea that was based on a religion, I don't know if maybe you saw in some movies that you can't really go against the church. In old times, when someone went against the church, they will take you in public and hang you and stuff. So these people, they were really risking their lives by saying these things that were against the church. So they really risked their lives by doing so. So even when Darwin published his paper, it wasn't accepted widely. There were a lot of people who said, this is not true. We are perfect because the God created us perfectly. But the way he started to develop these ideas were, through maybe fossils. So fossils provide evidence for slow change over time. I think this picture of Grand Canyon, it has about 40 layers. Layers are referred to as strata. Strata means a layer. I think there are about 40 layers. The neural layers on top, they represent neural layer top, and then the bottom represents older rock layers. And the layers, they have different color. The colors maybe came from, maybe there was a meteorite that hit the earth, and the radioactive dust, it just rained down, gave it a different layer. Maybe there was global warming, so different plant species rise during global warming, that gave different color to the layer. Or maybe there was ice age, and there were different species that were around ice age, and that gave it a different color. So this is when maybe a leaf got stuck in a mud and it left an impression. So they look at these fossils. They don't always find bones, but they find impressions of the bones. And they look at these fossils and then they question. This is also where the myth of the dragons came from. They found this lizard looking organism, which was dinosaur, and they thought it was a dragon. And they said we just have to look harder, and then maybe they're still around. And then Chinese people, they would take these, dinosaur rocks or dinosaur bones, and they thought it was dragons, and they would just grind them up, put them in their tea, and they thought it has some type of medicinal um, purpose, or they could use it for, something health, to improve their health maybe. So that's where the dragon myth came from. So Charles Darwin, he was a biology major, and in that time, if you're a biology major, you go ahead and you become a medical doctor. But he wasn't interested in becoming a medical doctor, but he was a privileged person. So his grandpa was able to hook him up with this job as a naturalist on HMS Beagle. HMS stands for Her Majesty's Service. This was a Navy ship. So he got this opportunity because he was a privileged person. Normal person wouldn't have this opportunity. So this ship was going around the world, and then it would make stops at different countries, different places, different islands. And each time the ship would stop, Darwin would take out his journal. He would write his notes down, or he would collect some plant species, preserve them, collect some animal species, birds. So he would just keep collecting species, making notes when each time the ship would stop. And then where he made his discovery was this part here, Galapagos Islands. Galapagos Islands, they belong to the country called Ecuador, and that's the name comes from because it's on the equator, Ecuador. It's just like Hawaii Islands near California. So these Galapagos Islands belong to Ecuador. I usually have very diverse population of students. Anybody here from South America? No. So here in this picture, so I had a student once, he was from Peru, and he said he went to the doctor and he got an x-ray of his lungs, and the doctor was amazed at how big his lungs were. And the reason for that is, if you go to Machu Picchu in Peru, it has high altitude, and because his ancestors lived in the high altitude environment, their lungs kind of adapted to supply the oxygen to the body to kind of fulfill for that amount of the oxygen. They had a bigger lungs and could produce more red blood cells as well and produce more oxygen because it was in high altitude. So his ancestors had, adapted to that environment. Therefore, they had bigger lungs so they could produce more oxygen in the high altitude environment. So they had different physiology, and that was pretty amazing. So if a tourist goes here, they might feel a little bit, dizzy because of high altitude and you're not adapted to that environment. But depending on, because we don't have that in California, and if you're from here and you go there, you might feel dizzy if you're, hiking on top. Anyway, so this point here, this is a vintage point. I think this is called Twin Lakes of Himalayas. So here they give you tours. So students who come here to the United States, they go back and they can work here. They know 4 to 6 languages. So they are making a lot of tourist money right now because of they're giving these tours. And there are a lot of research still going on where they're nowadays, because we have modern technology, they're just doing DNA fingerprinting of the species that are found there, and some using math models to analyze the theory of evolution. So still doing a lot of research here. So so he came up with this theory when he was around these Galapagos Islands. He noticed that the finches, the birds there, they had different beak sizes. So he described 14 types of finch species, and they had different beak sizes depending on where they lived. So he came up with a theory. His theory was that this was the mainland. This was the, this is Ecuador, and these are the islands. These are Galapagos Islands. So his theory was that the birds from here, they either got you know, in the storm and they're thrown off to this island, or maybe they hitched a ride on a log and they got to this island. I think it's about 600 miles in between. So he says somehow they got on this island. Depending on what's available on this island, for example, if it's cactus seeds, or if it's insects, or if it's a lot of woody plants, they adapted to the environment. And then they kind of got to the other islands, and depending on the food supply on each island, they had different beak sizes. So let's say it's a bird, which has this large beak size, and the food available on that island is only maybe large seeds. So this bird can eat the large seeds, and there's also this bird that has a small beak that's on that island. This bird cannot eat that food, therefore it's not going to survive to reproduce and to pass on the traits. So only these birds they survive long enough to reproduce and pass on the traits. So therefore, over time, these birds are going to disappear, and that island with the big cactus seeds are going to have the birds with the large beaks. So basically, that was his theory. So I will also show you animation during lab today, because we're probably not going to have time during lecture. That's going to um, show you how these birds kind of develop different beak sizes. So this was his theory. The beak shape of the finches varied depending on the food supply on each island. So if it was insects, they maybe needed, they were softer, so they needed smaller beak sizes. If it was woody plants, they, had a woodpecker finch, so different finch type. So at this point, he didn't know, he didn't really come up with the theory here. So what he did, he just, collected these birds, threw them in a bag, took them back to Europe. Over in Europe, he just gave them to the Natural History Museum of London, and there was an expert who looked at these birds, and he said, "Oh, these are close ulated species. They just have different beak sizes." And then he started kind of thinking about it after that. But at this point, he didn't even know which bird came from which island. It was later that people kind of went back and figured that out. So we learned a little bit about artificial selection. So at this point, he hasn't come up with the theory yet. So artificial selection. Um, Anybody wants to go ahead and define artificial selection for me in their own words? What is artificial selection? We talk about I think dogs and cats also happens in horses. So what is artificial selection? Can someone provide me with an example? Different traits. Donkey.
It's using the most desirable traits, right?
Yes, so you like a trait in a plant or animal. You pick that trait, and maybe you like another one in another animal, or if we talk about plant, and you cross them, and it's gonna give you, maybe an offspring with those both desirable traits. So that's artificial selection. It's interference from humans. Humans are picking and choosing which ones get to mate. So this also helped Darwin's theory of evolution. So here, if you go on a hike, you might notice this wild mustard plant. Anybody noticed it? It's gonna have black seeds, also known as black mustard. Anyway, so they kept crossing. So so they had uh, wild mustard plant and kept crossing. And after doing artificial selection, after crossing and crossing and crossing, we have these vegetables that are found in the grocery store. They do not exist in nature. Cabbage, kale, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, they do not exist in nature. These are coming from artificial selection after crossing over and over. And if you really think about it, the plant does not want to produce this much fruit where just gets eaten off. It just wants to produce enough fruit where it's able to entice the animals and have them spread the seeds. Anybody seen it can get really extreme. Anybody seen a wild banana or eaten a wild banana? No? Let me show you that. It can get very extreme. Oh, I was trying to look for Mission Peak fossils. I usually find few pictures, but I couldn't find anything. I think I have one picture saved, so let me show you that, and then I'll show you wild banana. Oh, I'll show it to you later. But anyways, if you go to Mission Peak in Fremont, and when you're walking up, you can see some fossils there. That's gonna show maybe a sea kelp or a shell. It's gonna show the fossils. I will have a picture next time for you to see that, so you can actually see that. Especially when you get on the top, and people are busy taking pictures. You can maybe look for fossils there. So let me show you wild banana first. So this is what wild banana look like. So look at the seeds. There isn't much in there, right? Because like I said, the purpose of this is to entice the animals, just give them enough sweet stuff to eat, and then they can just maybe poop out the seeds. And that's, how they're passing on their seeds. And look at this banana that we have today. This is extreme amount of artificial selection where we were able to take out all the seeds, and we just have this left, just the fruit. And a plant would never make this because this is not helping them pass on their seeds. This is just sweet stuff, and animals would eat this and then kind of go on their way and do nothing with the seeds. So this is extreme artificial selection. What about wild corn? You guys seen wild corn? No. So this is what wild corn looks like. Doesn't look like much, right? So there was artificial selection for corn as well, and now this is what we have. But most of the corn that's grown in the United States, um, you can't really eat that, and that's because they're making it for corn syrup and the white powder corn stuff that you guys put in your cooking when you make that. So if you eat this, it's just gonna taste like that corn syrup or the corn powder. So you can't really eat this, just starch there. So that's what wild corn looks like. But yeah, we wouldn't have this if it wasn't for artificial selection. They just kept crossing it until they kind of got all these. So in an artificial selection, if you want to know the definition, a human is choosing the traits. They're picking and choosing desired features, and then they choose who's mating with who. So they allow only the individuals that best express those qualities to reproduce. Now, Darwin, he knew about artificial selection, and this is what kind of helped him to come to the theory of evolution. So he had a hobby. He was raising pigeons, and he would like maybe fur color in one pigeon. He liked the beak color in other pigeon, and he would make them or cross them, and he would get the desired result. So he was doing artificial selection in pigeons, and this is what made him kind of think about the theory of evolution, and he was able to come up with this theory. Nowadays, I don't know if you guys know Mike Tyson. He has this pigeon coop on his rooftop, and he's doing this artificial selection with the pigeon. So this is his hobby. So that's his hobby. So Darwin was doing the same thing. So he was doing artificial selection with the pigeons, and that kind of helped shape his theory of evolution.